The woman was saying prayers as she hit herself. Soon she beat her back until it was covered with blood marks. The woman was actually a nun named Sisha. There are stories about her from 1939. In a small village in Spain, Sisha often sees visions that can't be explained. The news soon spread throughout the country. It is believed that she was inspired by God and rushed to the girl's side. People only want to be guided and blessed by God. The Spanish Civil War had just ended. People are in desperate need of a spiritual relief. Time soon comes 10 years later. By this time, Sisha had become a trainee nun. It's her day to report at the convent. The monastery was only closed when it was disturbed during the war. The local church decided to reactivate it and turn it into a missionary school. Sister Sisha was appointed by the Holy See to teach. She was waiting in the hallway for the headmaster. Suddenly a bead rolled down to Shisha's feet. Curious, she picked it up and looked. Shisha thought it was a student toy, but when she turned her head, the corridor was empty. Then the nun saw the headmaster. The headmaster was an old nun in the convent. She was surprised at Shisha's arrival. The legendary saint suddenly appeared before her eyes. The principal's office still has Shisha's report from 10 years ago. In the face of the principal's words of praise, Shisha do not know how to deal with. Shisha came to the dormitory assigned by the school. It was a weird feeling from the moment she walked in. She was hindered while putting her luggage. She tried several times but couldn't push the box in. So Shisha got a stool and climbed up to check. It turned out to be a wooden box that had been left behind. The box contained a strange pair of scissors, some letters and a photograph of a nun. The name of the nun in the photo is Socolo. While she was looking at it seriously, the chair beside him suddenly began to shake inexplicably. Next thing you know, the stool just falls. Shisha was stunned. Just then there was another rapid knock at the door. Shisha carefully opened the door. There was no one in the dark corridor. She was about to turn back to her room when she noticed a strange symbol on the opposite wall. Shisha walked over and looked carefully. Did he understand what the painting was? The next morning, Shisha walked into the warning room. She's been treated like a saint since she was a child. At first Shisha did receive divine instructions, and now she can't do it. Sisha even wondered if it was a childhood fantasy. The priest said that God's arrangement was purposeful and advised her to continue practicing asceticism. Soon ushered in Shisha's first class. As she introduced herself, a girl stares hard behind Shisha, as if she had seen something terrible. Then the girl raised her hand to signal that she wanted to leave. Shisha approached and found that the girl was scared and wet her pants. After getting Shisha's consent, the girl rushed out of the classroom. On that day, the headmaster took out the photo album and introduced the history of the monastery to Shisha. At the end of the album are the photos of some deceased elderly nuns. Shisha found that one of them was missing. It reminded her of the picture in her room. In the evening Shisha found the wooden box again. When she looked at the picture, once again, the chair in the room suddenly fell to the floor. This is exactly the same situation as yesterday. Then there was a rapid knock at the door. This time there was the sound of a little girl crying. Shisha hurriedly opened the door. The corridor was still empty. On the floor was a bead of the kind she had seen before. The next second the bead rolled along a black line, carrying the candle. Sisha followed the beads all the way to the basement of the monastery. An eerie dark figure flashed quickly. The basement was eerie. Sisha found a dropped object in the corner. She pulled back the white cloth wrapped around it to reveal a dry, severed hand. Shisha hurried to tell the headmaster. The principal could not conceal his excitement when he heard it. It turns out that this is the monastery's holy relic, the hand of St. Teresa. It disappeared during the war. The principal didn't expect that it would appear inexplicably now. The headmaster thought it was under the guidance of the Holy Mother and quickly pulled the two to kneel down to pray. They had finished praying and it was late into the night. Shisha passed the kitchen on his way back. She saw an old nun preparing for tomorrow's feast. She was kind enough to come forward and help. Did not expect Shisha was stopped by the other side. The old nun warmly invited Shisha to taste dim sum. The old nun also said that she had to swallow it in one gulp. Shisha just put the delicious snack in his mouth. She felt a strong feeling of nausea. The smell of blood filled her mouth. Shisha spit out a look at his eating is actually two bloody eyeballs. The old nun covered her eyes strangely and laughed. When she took her hand away, her dark eyes were revealed. Shisha was terrified. Good thing it was just a bad dream. Strange things have been happening ever since Shisha came to the monastery. This morning she suddenly noticed that the strange pattern on the wall of the doorway had increased. It's like a painting that no one else has had time to finish. That day Shisha met the girl who wet her pants last time on campus. The girl's name is Lola. The nun wants to know why she wet her pants. Laura told her it was because there was something in front of the blackboard. The nun asked what she saw. The girl wanted to go on. She was stopped in time by her sister. Her sister just walked away with Lola. What secrets seem to be hidden in the monastery? Night falls. Everyone is gathered in the church for evening classes. The rosary in Sister Shisha's hand suddenly spilled with blood. Then the beads quickly melted into a pool of blood. She couldn't believe her eyes. When Shisha raises his head again, there was a dead woman in front of her. The body of the dead woman floats slowly in midair in a large shape. At the same time her face slowly turned to Shisha. By the time she came to her senses, the body had disappeared. The rosary in her hand returned to normal. This evening, as usual, Shisha fell to his knees in front of the cross and whipped himself. The penance ceremony just ended. Shisha suddenly felt a strange fear. She looked around the room in horror. At the same time, just after using the toilet, Lola found that the faucet in the bathtub was inexplicably turned on, and there was a strange pair of scissors on the floor. The two girls are getting ready to leave. Suddenly there was a wild roar behind them. At the same time, the water level in the bathtub rose rapidly. The girls were pretty scared. Then the water began to roll violently, accompanied by the screams of a girl. After a while the water level slowly dropped. A strand of hair mysteriously appeared at the bottom of the bathtub. Laura went up to examine it. Then the vice principal suddenly appeared behind her. Then suddenly there was a scream. Sister Sisha hurried over when she heard the scream. It turned out that a girl's hair had been cut off. Everyone said that the girl had done it. Before Sister Sisha could clarify things, the vice principal arrived with Lola. The vice principal believed that Lola had cut the girl's hair. Lola explained that everything was done by the girl. She even claimed to have seen the girl in the bathroom. But the vice principal refused to listen and took her away. Sister Sisha returned to her room, and the scissors in the wooden box were gone. The monastery became increasingly eerie. The next day in class, observant Sister Sisha noticed that Lola was not in the classroom. It turned out that she had been put in solitary confinement by the vice principal. Sister Sisha brought food to Lola and asked who the girl she mentioned was. It was only then that she learned the secret of the monastery. Lola had been able to see the presence of ghosts since she was young. That's why she often saw the girl wandering around the monastery. The girl did not allow anyone to touch her painting. A young nun who had touched the girl's painting before was scared away from the monastery forever. The principal kept the news sealed and forbade anyone from mentioning it again. It was the day when Sister Sisha made her lifelong vow. She took the opportunity to inquire about the little girl. The principal refused to say much and quickly left with an excuse. Sister Sisha put on her veil and became absorbed in looking at herself in the mirror. What happened next almost scared her to death. Suddenly, the veil eerily wrapped around her neck and started tightening slowly. Soon, the veil was suffocating the nun, making it difficult for her to breathe. Even the clothes on Sister Sisha's body began to shrink along with it. Her clothes were torn. Sister Sisha woke up to find herself in another nightmare. The nun calmed herself down. At that moment, she suddenly noticed that the painting from the hallway had inexplicably moved into her bedroom, with a few extra strokes added to it. The shape of a little stick figure slowly appeared. From then on, Lola couldn't dare to look at the blackboard during class. On that day, Lola was so frightened that she ran out of the classroom because her name appeared out of nowhere on the blackboard. This seemed to foreshadow something bad happening. The nun lost interest in teaching. She knew that Lola could see the presence of ghosts, and she was certain that the ghost of the girl was planning something against her. The nun found Lola crying in the dormitory and promised to help her solve the problem. The nun took Lola to her room, and together they added another stroke to the painting. Sister Sisha thought that this would allow them to see the ghost of the little girl, but after searching the entire room, she didn't find anything unusual. Suddenly, a chair fell over, and Lola said that the ghost was standing behind the nun, but this time it wasn't the little girl, it was the ghost of another nun. Sister Sisha turned around and searched for a long time but didn't find anything. She wanted to know more details. When Sister Sisha turned around, she realized that Lola had already disappeared. The nun urgently mobilized the students to search for Lola, but they searched the entire monastery and couldn't find any trace of her. Just then, the sound of the girl's voice came from the admonition room. Sister Sisha opened a wooden door and walked in. Unexpectedly, she was trapped inside. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't open the door. The girl outside went to find help. Suddenly, the voice of the priest came from beside her, saying, "Did you use Lola just to see me?" The nun was trapped inside the admonition room like this. Just then, she heard a strange sound from beside her, and the nun tried to get closer to see clearly. Unexpectedly, the next second, an eye appeared out of nowhere, followed by more and more eyes appearing one after another. Then, countless hands reached out around her, trying to trap the nun inside. In a panic, Sister Sisha rushed out of the admonition room, but before she could recover, the adjacent compartment door opened automatically, and Lola's lifeless body appeared before the nun. The vice principal blamed the nun for Lola's death. If she hadn't insisted on finding the truth, perhaps today's tragedy wouldn't have happened. Sister Sisha couldn't forgive herself and decided to leave the monastery. At that moment, a solar eclipse occurred, and the sun gradually became smaller before the naked eye. Sister Sisha suddenly seemed possessed, uncontrollably spreading her arms and kneeling on the ground, staring at the sun in the sky. Darkness quickly completely obscured the sun, and just as the sun regained its radiance, a dazzling white light enveloped the nun, and her corneas slowly turned grey. As if she had received divine guidance again, Sister Sisha suddenly traveled back to the monastery during the war. The soldiers rushed into the monastery like wild beasts, not only vandalizing, destroying, and burning statues but also committing vile acts against the nun. A scream brought the nun back to reality in an instant, and her eyes were burned by the intense light. Everything turned into a hazy grey. She described the scene she saw to the vice principal. However, the vice principal was very reluctant to mention the matter and turned and left the room. Sister Sisha did not want to give up. She asked the nearby nun to help bring a photo of Sokolo. In the moment she touched the photo, Sister Sisha suddenly traveled back to the past. The nun who was defiled in the past was the woman in the photo. Unfortunately, the woman became pregnant as a result. A few months later, her child was born. However, the principal and vice principal considered it a shame for the monastery. They locked the nun and her child in this room. The mother and daughter were never able to leave this place again. Sister Sisha seemed to feel the resentment from that time. Tears of blood started flowing from her eyes. In anger, she tore off the gauze and cleaned her eyes. Just then, there was a strange sound behind her. Perhaps it was Sister Sokolo trying to show her true form to make Sister Sisha understand the injustice. However, by that time, she had already turned into a mummified figure. Sister Sokolo tightly held Sister Sisha's hands, allowing her to fully understand the truth of the past. That day, the little girl suddenly developed a high fever. Sister Sokolo wanted to take her daughter to the hospital for treatment. However, a few elderly nuns refused to let her leave the room. They immersed the girl in a bathtub to lower her temperature. During the struggle, the girl accidentally hit the back of her head. Since then, Sister Sokolo never saw her daughter again. In despair, Sister Sokolo ended her life in this room. Her ghost was also trapped in this room and could never leave. Just then, there was a sudden interplay of time and space. Sister Sisha seemed to have truly returned to the past. She listened to Sokolo's pleas in the room. Soft-hearted Sister Sisha opened the door. Along with Sister Sokolo's ghost, they walked out of the room. A revenge drama began to unfold. Sister Sisha found the vice principal and informed her that Sokolo had returned. Sister Sokolo's laughter immediately echoed through the monastery. This laughter not only resonated in the present reality but also in the past timeline. In the past timeline, the vice principal was chased by the ghost and sought refuge in the basement. The basement housed a large number of Virgin Mary statues. The principal was still staring blankly at the bathtub. In the present world, the vice principal was drawn to the classroom by mysterious sounds. Her name mysteriously appeared on the blackboard. The principal was praying in the office, facing religious artifacts. Sister Sokolo's ghost decided to take action in the past timeline. The water in the bathtub began to ripple inexplicably. The principal leaned closer to get a better look. In the next moment, she was pulled into the bathtub by a pair of ghostly hands. In reality, the principal immediately coughed up blood and eventually died on her office desk. In the past timeline, the vice principal sought the blessings of the gods before the statues in the basement. At that moment, the statues crashed down. In reality, the vice principal's face was immediately struck, leaving a deep indentation. Ultimately, she died in the classroom. Sister Sokolo approached the bathtub and gently embraced her daughter's lifeless body. After being separated for many years, the mother and daughter were finally reunited. Sister Sisha's eyes never regained their normal state. This grayish cornea accompanied her throughout her life. In the end, the monastery became a renowned church school. Sister Sisha continued to teach children regularly. The students also gave her a nickname, the Death Nun. The film concludes. This film is a highly rated Spanish horror movie called The Death Nun. It has a rating of 6.2 on Dubban. The director's understanding of lighting and composition in the film is very accurate. The director has created the perfect atmosphere of horror. Sometimes the truth is discovered through heartfelt understanding rather than mere observation. The actions of the principal and vice principal in the film can be described as cold and ruthless. They represent the traditional archetype. Sokolo is not the only one persecuted by the so-called religious traditions. If the nuns were not ignorant, superstitious, and vain, the tragedy of the little girl would not have occurred. The final scene of the nun's revenge is quite satisfying to watch. The film utilizes many door elements in its composition, creating a sense of curiosity and anticipation for the audience. The entire film is artistic yet still maintains its horror elements. Alright, that's it for today's video. See you in the next episode.